we can move on to corporate performance. Actually, before we do that, I should make clear that the item under governance and compliance 3.55 has been moved to the private part of the agenda because it includes commercially sensitive information.
Item 16.
Item 16. I'm sorry, I'm reading the time. Excellent. Good.
I like that.
Item 16. Good, okay. So, corporate performance. Trevor, you newly back from leave. Are you happy to lead us through this?
I'll just pick up some of the headlines for the month of August. Activity levels were slightly below our contracted levels of performance, but overall performance in terms of both activity and in terms of finance was stable for the month. We had a small surplus of £15,000 reported in August. Access to our service remained strong in terms of calls answered in 60 seconds and abandonment rates. Patient and user satisfaction levels were again very good. Where we continue to have some difficulty is with the clinical triage, clinical assessments, what we refer to as our P2, P3 targets, and also with levels of staff sickness, which remain a challenge for us. I'll leave my colleagues to either supplement that or happy to take questions on the report.
Questions? Comments? Tim?
I'm just looking at frontline staff time with patients stabilised at 45%. Filled me with a bit of gloom. I think I recall a discussion around this table where we were talking about moving from the then 39% or something to 60. And we wanted to see a pretty big step change in that. So I think we'd ask for some further comment, please.
Yeah.
Can I answer now? Or did you want to collect any other comments? Okay. In terms of the target for this year was 50, actually, Tim.
Thank you.
We're hoping to move to 60% from next year. As I think you probably recall, we had a conversation about needing to have the right framework in place in order to make sure that we were getting those levels of efficiency out of the system, which required some changes both to the contract framework that we were adopting, the way in which we hold our staff to account, some of the technology that supports us, and also some of our practices which will be coming from the service agreements, etc. So 50% was the trajectory target for this year, and it is an incremental trajectory over the course of this year to get to 50% by the end of the year.
So stabilised feels like we don't think we're going to get there.
It went up from, I think because of the rounding that we thankfully do, I think it's gone up from 44 to 45% in that month, which was a quieter month anyway. So, but yes, it is stabilising, and we need to make sure that we give it the momentum that it requires.
Yeah, I'm not sure what else we do, but I think that 50% is baked into our
budget by the end of the year.
Yeah.
End of the year, yeah.
Roger, then Peter.
Oh, there's lots still to do, Tim.
Indeed.
When the roster options beds in, that should improve. When first-line managers are appointed into the new positions, that should improve it. We'll be doing some cultural work following those appointments, and that should improve it as well. There is a lot in the game here still this year.
Good.
Peter?
I just wanted to say that I felt the overall KPIs, as a bunch of KPIs, had worked extremely well and were very positive, particularly the value to patients in the NHS, bearing in mind the amount of staff consultation about changes that are going on at the moment and the rostering changes. That's not to be complacent from my point of view, by the way, but I do recognise that that's going on at the moment, and particularly for frontline staff. But I do think that with the new rostering coming in, we'd expect to see those improvements coming through very soon. So there's a sort of moment because a dig there, but I do recognise the hard work that must have gone into achieving these in the recent past. A couple of other things. I'm just concerned that the volumes are going down, and because that is quite a penalty area for us, and I just wondered if something could be said a bit more about what the expectations are, because we've got a target, maybe a figure of 1.2 million, which is a bit scary, I felt. So that would be helpful. And we're going to deal with finance report a little later.
Yeah, we'll pick it up in a
Those
second.
are my two.
Okay, so Renette, you're going to be speaking later about rostering, is that
Yes,
right?
I am.
So
I wasn't quite sure, Chair, where you wanted me to speak to that on, because it's not a specific agenda item, so I'm happy to talk to that.
why don't we
now.
just do that in a moment? Nick, were you going to come in and say something?
I was going to just say something briefly on volumes. I think there are two aspects to it. One is the financial aspect, which is significant, and I suggest we deal with that under the finance report. The second is what are we doing, and what's the attitude of our main commissioner? Well, the attitude of our main commissioner is that increased volume of usage of 0845 is good for the NHS because it helps provide for patients' needs and it helps to prevent unnecessary demand into the face-to-face world. So they are very supportive of us taking actions to improve the usage, the volume usage of the service. There are restrictions on paid-for media advertising, which we would not wish to break, obviously, but we are undertaking targeted public information to enable the public to access the service appropriately. And actually there's a whole range of activities that are, I won't go into detail about, but Catherine, we're very happy to provide added detail outside the meeting.
Tim?
Just to respond to that, so are we doing less promotion now as a result of that blanket?
Less than what is the question?
Less than we would normally do.
Well, last year we did very little because flu did it all for us, as it were. And I can't speak for the year before. Catherine.
This is the danger because, are we in a sort of vortex of
No, I don't think
reducing call centres, call volumes, and is there something simple we can do about it?
I don't think simple is the answer. I think in terms of financial spend, we will be spending less this year than 2 years ago, and that is partly due to the restrictions in paid for advertising that we, amongst others in the public sector, are under. I think what we're doing is approaching it in a different way. So we're looking very carefully at all the different ways in which you can provide materials that aren't paid for routes. So, for example, writing out to working men's clubs, sure starts, job centres. So I think we're looking at it in a different way. It's something that we're working on, and I'm happy to, if it's appropriate, at another board or outside of the board, provide an update.
Yeah, because I do recall that, and maybe it's in the midst of time, I have to say, but there was a very strong relationship with call volumes and advertising on the way up, wasn't there? So this was about 3 years ago, wasn't it? So we know that call volumes are very elastic, in terms of our profile, if that's the best way to put it. So
Yeah.
it worries me a bit.
Okay, let's hold on to that thought for a minute. Louisa?
I just want to echo that, and I think clearly is a very strong link between calls and visibly seeing a number, visibly being reminded of the presence of NHS Direct, and particularly the winter pressures. It'd be nice to know that there was a campaign specifically around that, because that seems quite a good opportunity to get people in. And I was just wondering, I mean, the places that you name, I mean, do we have a sense of where our sort of constituents come from, and where, with all our sort of profiling things, do we have a sense of where we can most effectively sort of target any scarce sort of paid for resources.
Yeah, so we're working using the segmentation analysis. So that's part of where we're looking at. I was going to pick up the other point about winter pressures, is that I think the important thing is that we feed into the existing NHS Choose Well campaigns, because that is traditionally the kind of winter pressure campaign, and I think it's doubly important for us to make sure we're in it this year, because it's another opportunity to say, yes, despite what you've heard, we are still here and we're part of your winter planning. And I think at the moment my team and the business development teams are working with the PCTs and SHAs to get a sense of what is happening with the Choose Well campaigns, because I think historically they've had quite a lot of money behind them, and I'm not sure whether they will be affected as well. So that's something we're looking at.
Okay. Trevor?
We know that calls to NHS Direct reduce referrals to GPs and to hospitals. So I was concerned to read in the Finance report that the advertising budget is being reduced by £750,000. But from what you just said, Catherine, that isn't something we're doing internally. Did you say that reduction is because of national restrictions of advertising?
There is, as part of the revision to the standard operating framework, it spells out, and I might look to Nick to help me out with the exact detail, but it expects that NHS trusts will apply the same level of restraint as the government departments and public sector bodies, which is actually, it's very tight in the government departments at the moment. You cannot, to spend any money on any paid for advertising, you have to go through, it's about a 3-stage process to have the freeze restrictions, it's called. So we're doing that in line with that instruction.
I would be uneasy if that results in a consequential increase in costs in the NHS by extra referrals to GPs at the hospitals.
No, good point. Very good point.
It's almost the definition of advertising, actually, isn't it, here?
Very good. That's excellent.
Trevor?
We've certainly, as Nick said, we've tried to work very closely with the Strategic Health Authority in terms of making sure we've got the coverage and a sign-off of where we feel it's appropriate to be spending money on raising public awareness and trying to promote the activities of our service. And the other reassurance I would like to give you is that those funds that we've got remain within our control. We've just brought them in centrally. So if there are other cases that we see where it would be appropriate for us to invest money in raising awareness further, that is available.
Nick?
Sorry, just a final twist to, because we must not assume that it is a linear or indeed an easy algorithm between paid for or advertising or public information on the one side and increased volume on the other. So in subjecting Catherine and her colleagues to scrutiny about, well, what's the impact that we expect from these various different promotional and public information campaigns. On the one side, we're hoping very much that they will increase volume, but when you come to the question, so do we roster more staff in 4 weeks' time in expectation that these will deliver X additional calls, you end up being a lot more cautious, because the reality is you don't have the evidence that says if you spend this amount of money, it results in these extra numbers of people accessing the service. So let's not assume that there's a nice easy increase in volume, that if only we did X, Y and Z, it would automatically happen, because that's not the reality. This is, it's much more opaque than that.